Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. And today we are talking about love and dating and one of my least favorite things on the internet, which is relationship advice that tries to turn something as complicated as long term love into a 5 step checklist. We are going to break down the so called stages of love where there might be some truth in them, where I think they become very misleading, and why staying through the hard parts is not always some noble sign that you're doing relationships correctly. And I'm also getting into something personal things about what my marriage taught me, what my new relationship has shown me about feeling safe enough to like be myself and let my freak flag fly, and why one relationship can teach you to brace for impact while another can remind you that not every single man on the planet is terrible, but most of them are, but not all of them. But before we get into it, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod, which I just realized I forgot to post on TikTok for like the last month. I'm going to need to do that. Head over to my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and topic suggestions. So let's talk about why love is way too messy for a fucking Instagram carousel of 5 simple posts, okay? Like, put your phones down, walk away from your Instagram, stop following those bullshit accounts, okay? And let's hit it.
HOTAIR, hot takes therapy, no filter, say what I mean. HOTAIR, let's be real, you're listening to Hot Air.
Part 1. Apparently, love has a 5 step user manual now. So, I saw this reel on Instagram that laid out the 5 stages of long term love. And almost immediately, I was like, oh my God, I fucking hate this. Not because every single thing in it like was wrong, because some of it was actually pretty relatable, but because I very much dislike when social media takes something as complicated and deeply personal as love, or the idea of love, and turns it into a fucking flow chart. Okay. So, according to this reel, long term love goes a little something like this. And I'm not going to wrap it, but it goes a little something like this. So, first, there's the magic, which is where everything feels perfect. The chemistry is incredible. The sex is hot, and you are convinced you have found your person. Then comes this stage that they called, "What are we bickering about?" And that is where the little arguments begin. The forgotten texts start to bother you, and fear and frustration creep in. Then, apparently, you enter the villain victim era, where each person thinks that the other person is the problem, and everyone is trying to prove their case. People feel unseen and rejected, and this is supposedly where couples either break up or they get stuck in that phase. After that comes something they called mirror mirror, which I'm like, you couldn't have come up with a better name, where you finally realize that you have your own work to do. You examine your triggers and patterns, you heal, you grow, you grieve, and maybe your partner grows with you. And then finally, if you survive all of that emotional CrossFit, congratulations, you arrive at stage 5, which is called the conscious relationship, where you stop fighting each other and start fighting for the relationship. Everything becomes deeper and everything becomes more intentional. The love gets better, the sex gets better, and presumably a flock of doves appears every time you resolve an argument and walk outside. Like, lovely, very tidy, very shareable. Also, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what? Riddle me this. The only riddle I have is what? And before I continue, I am not an expert in love. And I'm not doing this episode because I am in a relationship now. I found this reel a long time ago, stumbled across it again maybe a few weeks ago, and then again just a few days ago. Obviously, the algorithm is trying to tell me something. And I remember when I saw it the first time, and I was like, yeah, this is great. This is wonderful. And I was like, oh, interesting. But I just kind of like brushed it off. And then when I saw it the next time when I was in a relationship, I was like, this is such a crock of absolute shit. And that goes for all kinds of things on the internet, not just love. When things are boiled down into this very, very simple checklist that, quite frankly, can only be experienced by the most privileged of people and doesn't apply to the grand scheme of fucking life. So I am not an expert. I am not doing this episode because I am now in a relationship and I think that I know everything, but I have learned some things along the way, okay? So, I understand why content like this is popular. We love a roadmap. Human beings are obsessed with knowing where we are and what happens next, especially when something feels very uncertain. Obviously, love is very uncertain. If your relationship is confusing or painful or changing, there is something incredibly comforting about seeing a graphic or a reel that says, "Don't worry, you are simply in stage 3." Like, suddenly, your pain has a name. Stage 3. And better yet, it has a destination. You're not fighting with your partner because something might genuinely be wrong. You are fighting because this is apparently the development phase, or the developmental phase, rather. You need to pass through it before you can reach enlightened sex in stage 5. Give me a fucking break. And that is where I think these kinds of frameworks can become very misleading, because the second that you tell people there is a predictable sequence to healthy, lasting love, you risk turning description into instruction. Something that started as, hey, some couples experience this quietly and quickly becomes, this is what love is supposed to look like. And if you want a mature relationship, you need to keep going until you reach the next stage. That is a very different message. And I especially hate the implication that hardship is somehow proof that a relationship is becoming deeper. We are obsessed with romanticizing the struggle. Like, people are always like, relationships are hard work and love is a choice and you have to fight for each other. And sure, sometimes, but I think people hear phrases like that, including myself, and start believing that the harder a relationship feels, the more meaningful it must be. Like, you are earning some kind of romantic merit badge every time you survive another screaming match. I do not think healthy love has to be effortless, but I also do not think suffering is a prerequisite for depth. And sometimes a hard period is something that two people move through together. Sometimes a hard relationship is simply a hard relationship, and those are not automatically the same thing. I think that social media relationship advice often gets very fucking sloppy about that distinction. There is a big difference there. So, like, imagine you are in a relationship where you constantly feel dismissed, criticized, controlled, afraid to speak up, or emotionally exhausted. And then somebody tells you, like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. You're just in the villain victim era. This is like where people usually break up. But if you can look inward and work on your own triggers, you can eventually reach conscious love. And that may sound empowering to one person, but to someone else, it could become a reason to ignore what their own body has been telling them for months. Maybe you are not failing to evolve. Maybe you are just unhappy. And maybe the issue is not that you have not done enough healing. Maybe you and this person are not good together. Maybe something needs to change. Maybe you need to leave them. I am deeply uncomfortable with any relationship framework that subtly makes leaving sound like you did not complete the lesson, like mission failed. Absolutely the fuck not. Leaving is like a mission accomplished for me. And before anyone gets mad at me, like, I am aware of the enormous hypocrisy here, like, because I'm now doing an entire episode where I'm going to talk about relationships while telling you there is no single way relationships are supposed to work. Like, I hear it. I am literally criticizing somebody for handing people a relationship roadmap while I sit here in my pod room and behind a microphone and spend what, over an hour and a half split into 2 episodes talking about what I think healthy love can look like. So I just want to establish something very clearly at this point. I am not replacing their 5 stages with my like 6 commandments or something, okay? I am not a relationship guru. There will be no laminated certificate at the end of this episode declaring that you have mastered emotional intimacy. I am talking about what I have experienced, what I have learned, and what feels true to me now, and what I think is worth questioning. And that will always evolve in the future and change. Your relationship may look completely different from mine and the ones I've had in the past and still be incredible. Okay. Something that was unhealthy for me might not show up the same way in your relationship. And something I love about my current relationship might drive you absolutely fucking insane in yours. And that is exactly my point in all of this. I just feel like I've learned a fucking lot in the last, what, 10 months. So, what I want to do with these 5 stages is not say they're wrong and here are the correct ones. I want to pull them apart and ask what is actually underneath them because there are little pieces of truth here. New love often does feel intoxicating. Couples do eventually discover conflict. People absolutely project their own fears onto partners. Relationships can expose patterns that we need to work on. Intentional communication can create much deeper intimacy. Fine. Okay. Those things are valid, but those are experiences, not train stations that we must stop at along the way. You do not necessarily arrive at them in a certain order. You can revisit them, you can skip them, you can have a relationship where conflict begins early and trust deepens later. You can have intense chemistry with somebody who is absolutely terrible for you, been there, done that. You can have a relationship that feels calm from the beginning and mistake that calmness for a lack of passion because you are used to chaos. Also, been there, done that. Love is not a video game, okay? Where you defeat the boss at level 4 and unlock secure attachment. And maybe that is the larger thing that I want to talk about today, that our obsession with asking, like, is my relationship normal? Instead of asking, how does my relationship actually feel to me? Because normal can hide a lot of shit. Plenty of unhealthy dynamics are very common. Plenty of people stay unhappy for decades, if not their whole entire lives. And plenty of couples argue constantly. The fact that something happens in relationships does not automatically make it something that you need to accept in yours. I think a more interesting set of questions is, can I be myself with this person? Can I tell the truth? What happens when I am vulnerable? And how do they react when I am vulnerable? How do we handle disagreement? Do I feel smaller in this relationship or more like myself when I express a feeling? Does my partner need to agree with me, or can they at least make room for the fact that I am feeling something? And when something hurts repeatedly, do I see meaningful change, or am I just becoming better at explaining away the same behavior? Those are a lot of deep, important questions, but questions we're going to get into. And those questions are less sexy than 5 stages of lasting love because unfortunately, they don't fit neatly into an Instagram carousel. Although I might have to make one for this episode, but real relationships do not fit neatly into anything. Okay. And I think that is exactly where we need to start. Part 2, the magic. Chemistry is real, but it's not a down payment for forever. All right, so let's start with stage 1, which the reel that I'm talking about called the magic. And honestly, this is probably the stage I have the least issue with because, yes, new love can feel fucking magical. There is a reason that people lose their absolute minds at the beginning of relationships. Everything is new, everything is exciting. You are learning this person in real time, and every little discovery feels very important. You find out that they like the same obscure song that you love, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, this is fate. They order the same appetizer you were going to order, and you start mentally combining your last names. Like, do we hyphenate it or what? Okay. The sex is hot. The chemistry is intense. You're texting all day. You're staying up until 2 in the morning talking about childhood trauma and favorite movies. Like, you've cracked some secret code to human connection. And because neither of you has yet had to argue about whose turn it is to buy toilet paper, obviously everything feels remarkably uncomplicated. And I understand why we romanticize this part. I mean, it feels fucking great, right? It is intoxicating. But the thing that I don't love is when we treat that feeling as proof that we have discovered the person, like capital T, capital P, the person. And everything that happens afterward is simply the relationship becoming less magical. Sometimes the beginning is magical because you are compatible. Sometimes the beginning is magical because you're horny. Sometimes it is magical because neither of you knows enough about the other person yet to be properly annoyed. And sometimes it's magical because you haven't healed yourself and you're repeating the same patterns over and over again. Okay. I think chemistry gets given way too much authority in dating. We say things like, there was just this spark, as though the spark conducted a full background check. Chemistry can tell you that you want to be around somebody, and it can tell you that your body is interested in that person. It can tell you that conversation feels exciting or there is something about this person that you want more of. But what it cannot tell you is whether they communicate well when they're upset, whether they respect boundaries, whether they are kind when somebody is watching, and whether they take accountability or what else, whether their lifestyle actually works with yours, whether they want the same future, or whether 6 months from now you're going to discover they think putting wet towels on the bed is acceptable human behavior. Chemistry is information. It is not a prophecy. Okay. It doesn't mean you have to be with that person forever. And I say that as somebody who absolutely loves chemistry. I want chemistry. I do not want to date somebody who makes me feel like I'm attending a network lunch, talk about fucking boring. But I think we confuse intensity with compatibility all the time. And those are very different things. I also think that some of us have been trained by past relationships to believe that uncertainty itself is chemistry. If you have spent enough time around inconsistent love, then somebody being difficult to read can feel exciting and familiar. They text you constantly for 2 days and then they disappear. And suddenly you cannot stop thinking about them. They are incredibly affectionate one night and then distant the next morning. And instead of your brain going, this person is inconsistent, probably shouldn't continue with them, it goes, wow, I have never felt this strongly about anyone. Like, of course you haven't. You are being psychologically waterboarded by friggin' text messages and notifications on your phone. Your nervous system is doing parkour again, baby. That intensity can feel like passion because you are constantly waiting for the next little hit of reassurance. And what is it? It's that dopamine, right? Which we talked about before. And dopamine is so overused, but it's like that hit, it's that anxiety, it's you're feeling something physically, emotionally, all the ways. Then you meet somebody who says what they mean. They text when they say they would. They follow through on their plans, and they're generally not trying to turn Wednesday dinner into like an emotional escape room. And part of you might initially go like, something is missing here. There's not quite that spark. And like maybe, or maybe nothing is missing except anxiety that you learn to associate with attraction. And that is something I've had to think a lot about in my current relationship. Because one of my biggest surprises has been discovering that safety and attraction are not opposites. When you have come from a relationship where you were used to questioning yourself or bracing for someone's reaction, there can be a very long adjustment period when you meet somebody and suddenly you are not constantly trying to manage the temperature of the room. You are not decoding every shift in tone. You are not wondering whether expressing a preference is somehow going to become a debate that will last for hours and turn into a giant argument. And what is weird is that you can become so accustomed to relational stress that its absence almost feels suspicious at first. Like you think like, wait, is this is just like what, nice? Like, is this allowed? And I want to be clear here. Nice does not mean passionless. Calm does not mean boring. And predictability does not mean there is no chemistry. Sometimes it means that your attraction is finally getting to exist without being mixed together with fear. I spent the first few months of my current relationship expecting for him to disappear because that's happened to me multiple times. I mean, my husband left and disappeared for 3 months, funsies. And I expected texts to go unanswered. I expected to be ghosted. I felt this calmness and realizing that not living in anxiety and stress and fear of being ghosted felt so unfamiliar that I was then concerned that something was missing. Not to a point where it was detrimental, but I had to like sit down with myself and be like, this is what it's like when somebody isn't fucking around with you. Like this calmness is the security I've been looking for. This niceness is passion. Like it's like rewiring my whole way of thinking about the beginning of a relationship. Like having a reliable person is in this day and age is wild and crazy and doesn't happen that often. And all of that to say that this is why I would rather call the first stage of love discovery instead of the magic. Because the magic implies that the beginning is the purest version of the relationship and everything afterward is somehow slow descent into reality. Discovery feels way more honest. Like at the beginning, you are discovering each other. You're discovering another person. You're discovering the things that you have in common, the things you absolutely do not understand about each other. You are discovering how they communicate, what they value, what they are like when they are tired, how they treat service workers if you're out at a bar or for dinner, how they talk about their exes, their family, their past relationships, whether they can laugh at themselves, whether they ask questions about you or simply wait for their next opportunity to speak about themselves. And at the same time, you are discovering yourself around them. And that is a really important part of this. Who am I when I am with this person? Do I feel relaxed? Do I perform? Do I edit myself? Do I feel like I need to be cooler, quieter, sexier, less emotional, more agreeable, like more impressive? Or do I gradually feel permission to become more recognizable to myself? One of the traps of early dating is falling in love with potential before we have actually gathered enough information about reality. You meet somebody and very quickly start building a story around them. They are not just the person that you went on 3 dates with anymore. They are the person you could travel with and move in with and marry and build a life with. Meanwhile, you do not know their middle name, okay? We are incredible, incredible storytellers when we are excited. We fill in missing information with whatever we hope will be there. And sometimes that works out beautifully because sometimes you're correct. And sometimes the person actually becomes even better as you know them. But sometimes 6 months later, you realize you were not falling in love with who they were. You were falling in love with your projection of what they could become, things you didn't even know about them, if they behaved exactly the way that you imagined and hoped in your head. So I think the better question during what we're not calling the magic, we're calling discovery, is not, is this my person? That is a huge fucking question to ask when you still think everything they do is adorable, okay? We don't know that yet. Ask smaller questions. Do I like who this person actually is? Like very plain and simple. Do their words and actions line up? Do I like who I am becoming around them? Can I remain curious instead of immediately casting them in the starring role of a future they have not agreed to yet? Because, honey, they don't know we're being crazy. Because I don't think the goal of early love should be to predict whether somebody will be there forever. I think the goal is to stay awake enough to actually meet the person standing right in front of you. Like, enjoy the butterflies. Have your incredible fun sex. Stay up late. Like, just until the sun fucking rises. Romanticize the shit out of it if you want. I am not here to ruin anybody's honeymoon phase, okay? I am a little bit more grounded, but maybe do not confuse that feeling of this feels amazing with therefore this must last. Some love stories begin with fireworks, some begin slowly and quietly, some chemistry grows, some chemistry explodes and then reveals there was absolutely nothing underneath it. The magic is not proof, okay? It is an invitation to keep discovering. And what matters next is not whether the butterflies stay exactly the same at the same level and the same feeling. It is what happens when the first real disagreement finally walks into the room. Part 3. What are we bickering about? Conflict is normal. Feeling chronically unsafe is not. Stage 2 in this Instagram reel is basically, what are we bickering about? I'm pretty sure that's what they titled it. And this is where those little things start, which they described as the forgotten text message, the tone that you did not like, somebody leaves something out, somebody gets annoyed, somebody says, I'm fine, in a way that very clearly means I'm absolutely not fine. And you have approximately 12 seconds to read my mind and figure out why. And yes, obviously, conflict is going to happen. If you spend enough time with another human being, eventually one of you is going to do something that irritates the shit out of the other person. It's inevitable. I always think about this. I'm like, you have friends that do things that irritate you. You have family members and coworkers and random people on the street that do things that piss you off and push your buttons. Why would your partner be any different? Why would there be this magical human being that you are in love with that what is not going to irritate the fuck out of you at times? Like, that is reality. And sometimes I'm getting off on my tangent here. I'm not even following what I was going to say. But sometimes when that happens and we're like, oh, that's rubbing me the wrong way, or this is weird, or this is pissing me off, or that's a little bit annoying. A lot of people break up with people for those little itsy bitsy things. Like, literally, you have back hair, I'm breaking up with you. Like, people do that, okay? Or you don't have enough hair on your head and you're balding. I'm breaking up with you. People do that. But if we are going to accept friends and family for annoying the fuck out of us sometimes, then like we need to give our partners a little bit of wiggle room here. So back to my script, okay? You're gonna get irritated by the person that you love. I do not care how compatible you are. You are two separate nervous systems, two separate histories, two separate sets of habits, and two different families, two different communication styles, two different relationships with money and sex and cleanliness, time, socializing, space, affection, texting, and where the hell the toothpaste cap belongs. Of course, there is going to be friction, but I think the mistake is treating conflict itself as the important part, as if the existence of arguments proves the relationship has moved into some deeper stage. I do not think the real question is, do you fight? I think the real question is, what happens when you do? Conflict can look wildly different depending on the relationship. You can disagree with someone and still feel safe with them. You can be annoyed or triggered, confused or hurt, and still know that you are allowed to say all of those things without the entire relationship turning into a courtroom drama. You can have a hard conversation and still feel like the two of you are standing on the same side of the table. And then there is the other version where every concern becomes a case to argue, every feeling becomes something that needs to be explained away, and every disagreement becomes about who is objectively correct. By the end of it, you're not even talking about the original issue anymore. You are defending your right to have had a reaction or an opinion or a perspective in the first place. And that is exhausting. And that is what honestly, that's what my marriage was like. Okay. I think sometimes people hear relationships require communication and assume that that means if you are talking, you are communicating. And that is not necessarily true. You can have a 3-hour conversation and still leave feeling less understood than when you started. And one of the biggest differences that I have experienced between my marriage and my new relationship is what happens when I bring up something that is bothering me. And I want to be very careful here because I am not interested in turning this into my ex was evil and my new man is perfect. That is not the fucking point, nor do I believe that. And even if I did say that, like that wouldn't be honest. Everyone is on their own journey and dealing with their own shit at their own time. And sometimes we just don't work together, okay? I make little quips here and there about my marriage and like it did not work. It was not a healthy relationship, but I don't think that human being is like a terrible human and should be like exiled to I don't know where, the moon. Now that being said, I got to bring a little context to this, right? In my marriage, when I would bring up a feeling or a concern, there was often this immediate questioning that followed. It was like I was in a police room being interrogated. Maybe the intention was genuinely to understand, but maybe from his perspective, asking questions was how he processed things. But from where I was sitting and receiving the questioning, it felt like an interrogation. Like I was in I don't know, a padded cell with a table and a light that was swinging from the ceiling, like literal detective movie shit. Like if I just said like this hurt me, whatever this was, and instead of feeling like there was room for that feeling to exist, I would get questions that made me feel like I had to justify more and more and more why I felt that way. Like it would be like, well, why did that bother you? Well, why do you think that? Are you sure that is what happened? Could it be because of this? Could it actually mean that? Eventually, I would leave like the conversation thinking like, wait, am I wrong for feeling this way? Like, huh? And I honestly did not realize this until about 2 weeks ago. Probably not even 2 weeks ago. And keyword, therapists said it, friends have said it, gaslighting, which I've never used that word to explain an experience that I have had before, but I guess that's what it is. But literally this line of questioning would go on for so long. I was convinced out of whatever feeling it was that I was trying to express. And that is such a disorienting experience because now the conversation is not even about the thing that hurt me anymore. It is about whether your interpretation of your own emotional experience is even like has any value or is admissible. Like you start building a legal defense for your feelings. Like exhibit A, here is why I was upset. And exhibit B, here is the text that made me anxious. Exhibit C, please note that I am not fucking insane and I do not think your partner has to agree with every feeling you have, okay? Sometimes we get triggered by things that are not actually about the other person. Sometimes we misunderstand. Sometimes our interpretations are just straight up wrong, and that happens. But there is a massive, massive difference between someone saying, I see why that landed badly for you, even though that's not what I meant, and then someone making you feel like the conversation cannot move forward until you have been convinced that you should not have felt hurt in the first place. Now, to contrast that, in my new relationship, one of the things that has made me feel the safest is that he has always made it clear that I can bring anything to him and vice versa. If I am anxious, if something triggered me, if my brain is creating a story because it loves to do that, sorry, if I'm worried about something that may objectively be ridiculous, I can say it. And the important part is not that he always goes, "You are completely right." That that would also be crazy. I do not need a boyfriend who treats every anxious thought I have as like a sacred prophecy. What matters is that I do not feel punished for saying it out loud. I can come to him and say, like, okay, hey, this happened, and this is where my brain went. And there is room to talk about it. And we talk about it without me immediately feeling like I have to prove I am reasonable enough to deserve reassurance. And that changes everything because when you know you can speak, small things do not have to become giant things in your head. And this is what I think gets missed when we reduce conflict to quote unquote bickering. Sometimes the issue itself is genuinely very tiny, but the emotional meaning underneath it is not. And maybe the forgotten text is not really about the text. Maybe it touched a fear of being forgotten. Maybe the tone was not objectively terrible, but it reminded you of another relationship where you learned that certain tones meant danger. Maybe your partner did not do anything wrong at all, but your nervous system reacted before your logic had a chance to catch up. In a healthy dynamic, you can bring that information into the room and not as an accusation, not as a like, you caused this, you did this, fix it or fix me. Like, you're just bringing it as context. And this is what happened inside of me. Like, that's the context. This is what happened in my history and my feelings. And then the two of you get to decide what to do with that information together. And that is why I would completely reframe the stage about bickering. I would not call it, what are we bickering about? I would call it, how do we repair? Because conflict is inevitable. Guys, come on. It's inevitable. Repair is the skill. Do you come back to each other after a disagreement? Can one of you say, I got defensive there, didn't I? Like, can somebody apologize without immediately adding, okay, but you also dot dot dot. No, no buts, unless it's butt sex. I had to say that. Sorry. Can you stay curious about each other without turning curiosity into cross examination? Can you make space for the fact that two people can experience the exact same interaction completely differently? And neither one has to be declared clinically insane for the relationship to survive. And sometimes both of you are wrong and both of you are right. Like, it's just the way it is. And maybe most importantly, do the conversations actually lead anywhere? We overvalue communication when what we should be paying attention to is change. You can talk beautifully about the same issue every month for 3 fucking years and still be stuck. You can have the most emotionally intelligent vocabulary in the world, like I do, and still behave like an asshole, like I do sometimes. I I hear that you felt unseen is like lovely, right? Is lovely. But if you keep doing the exact thing that makes your partner feel unseen, eventually the words are just decorative. Repair is not just saying the right thing afterward, it is caring enough about the rupture to make some kind of adjustment. And one thing that has been coming up a lot for me lately is when my marriage ended, I went to therapy, got a new therapist. Everyone knows I've made a lot of progress in therapy, the way that I express myself, my confidence levels, like just speaking up when something doesn't vibe right with me. And I thought that that healing would also heal, trauma from my past relationship. And I would never experience triggers and like nothing would ever trigger me again, or nothing would remind me of those negative aspects of my marriage. But you don't know that until you are in a new relationship. In my current relationship, there are little things that will pop up that will trigger me, not because of my boyfriend, but because of my past and my experiences. And these things will show up, and I freak out a little bit and I get scared and anxious and nervous. And I have to remind myself that I don't know if I'm over these things until I experience them again. I don't know how to navigate these things and these triggers differently unless I'm in a new relationship. Like, one thing, for example, my ex, really moody. Okay. And when he would get moody, the whole day was ruined. Everything was terrible. And it would always turn into a giant argument, a giant fight, a giant blow up in which it had nothing to stand on. Like, there was literally no reason for it. But somehow, if something went wrong, some plan went off the rails, it was my fault. And I would have to then be interrogated and be questioned and like try to like repair the situation to the best of my ability, or the rest of the day was going to be really uncomfortable, really awkward, and very anxiety filled. Now, being in a new relationship, human beings can be moody. Human beings ebb and flow between their emotions. And so my boyfriend, if he's having a rough day and feels emotional about something and isn't in the best mood, I automatically revert to how I used to be in my marriage, which is, oh my God, it's all my fault. Everything is terrible. This is going to just keep getting worse and worse and worse until he is going to blow up and he's going to start yelling at me and calling me names. And then it's like, I thought I was over this shit. But you don't know what you are over and what you are not, or what you have healed and what you haven't healed until somebody shows you that things can be different. And so I am relearning a lot of these triggers. I just think that's a really important thing for people to know when they're going into a new relationship, that that person is not the same as your ex. They might have similar characteristics, but it doesn't always mean it's going to go to those same places. And that's something I'm learning along the way. Little side note, okay? So, yes, there will probably be a point in any and every relationship where the easy fantasy gives way to the reality that the person is unfortunately a human being. We're all human. They are going to annoy you. You are going to annoy them. Somebody will misunderstand something. Somebody will get triggered and somebody will say the wrong thing. That does not mean that the magic, the quote unquote magic, is gone. Okay. But it also does not mean that every form of conflict should be normalized as part of some necessary relationship stage. The question is not whether you bicker. The question is whether you can disagree and still recognize each other at the end of it. Whether you can bring your whole emotional experience into the relationship without being made to feel ridiculous for having one. And whether conflicts give you more understanding over time or slowly teaches you to stay quiet, because those are very, very different relationship experiences. And that, my friends, is where we are going to end part one of this reframing of Instagram craziness and also talking about my past and current relationships. So I think that's a lot to take in. We have a lot more stages to get to. What was that? We have 3 more stages to get to? I can't count today. Math was never my strong suit, even though there's only 5 stages that we really need to talk about. So part 2 of this reframing of the 5 stages of long-term love is going to come out on Friday. So we got 2 episodes this week. And as always, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Visit my website, hot.com, to shop my merch, submit your listener stories and topic suggestions. And if this episode resonated with you, I know my dating episodes have the most downloads, and I kind of love that for me. Even though I'm certainly not a guru in relationships of any sort, I'm just a human being trying to make my way through life. But if this episode spoke to you, feel free to share it with your friends, family. This is a very shareable episode because everybody knows somebody who's either going through a breakup or is healing from a breakup or is about to break up or just went on a date or has been dating someone for a few months and hasn't said I love you yet, or is about to move in with their partner, or is about to get engaged, or is about to get married, or is about to have a kid, or is struggling in their marriage, is about to get divorced. All the phases of love. So I think we can all learn from this. And love is hard and it is messy, but there really is a way to do it where you're not repeating those patterns and you're healing together. And when you find somebody that is able to accept you as you are and you guys can heal together and grow together, it is so different and magical. And anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Part 2 comes out on Friday. I will talk to you guys then, and thanks for spending some time with me.
HOTAIR, hot takes therapy, no filter. Say what I mean. HOTAIR, let's be real. You're listening to Hot Air.